I want you guys to count with your fingers, okay? Don't write this stuff down. I want you to count with your little fingers. I don't know what you guys are doing right now. I don't know if you're at work. I don't know if you're driving. I don't know if you're walking down the street and you're going to look like a fucking moron. You guys are fucking stupid anyway. I told you anyway. Use your fingers, okay? So let's go with Pedro, right? That's one. Then we go with Eric, Hensel, me, Orlando, me, Jay, Ed, and Paul. Hold those fingers up. Because I really didn't have any clue up until the other day that this is our 10th season. Had no clue. You know, you can go back to the years prior to 2010 where we don't have any statistics on anything. All we know is champions and we know Tito. We know the extreme points. We know the best points and we know the lowest points. So we know champions, we know Tito, we know Cosme, and that other kid, hard hitting, that was in this league. I think those are two friends of Ed's. We remember my brother-in-law that used to be in the league. That was Aaron and Reef. Some of the worst players we've ever had in the league's history. We may even say below Tito. Tito was the bare minimum of activity that we could shit on and say that he's bad. The other guys were just absentee parents. They just never showed up at all. So we remember the high points. We remember the low points. Paul has become the 10th champion of this league by defeating Andy 132-99. That is the highest point total in any championship game, his 132. He is also the lowest seed to win a championship at number 5. The division winner doesn't have much luck in the chip. Only 2 division winners have won the championship, and that is Jay and Orlando. Orlando did it in 2011. Jay did it in 2013. I'd also like to point out that if Ed wouldn't have done what he did last week with the AJ Green, Andy would have won the championship because Ed's team this week scored about 60-something points, and no matter what lineup Ed would have thrown in there, he would have came up short up against Andy. So that's some really trippy stuff when you consider the fact that Andy could have had the championship, bro. He could have had it if Ed wouldn't have done it, bro. What if? What ifs don't matter. What ifs don't matter. And Andy lost. Once again, as Jay mentioned, he is, probably the Buffalo Bills of this league. Make it to the, whatever, and then always fall short. I thought he had a better team, but I was wrong. Of course, I doubted Paul's team throughout most of this thing. I mean, I gave him one round, and then at the beginning of, I didn't think he was going to beat O. And obviously, you saw from that week on, O just went on a rampage, which would make me feel even shittier, by the way. If I were him, I would feel even worse. If my team was putting up 100-point performances, I'm like, well, shit, then I know for a fact I had a team that was fully fucking capable, and they just had a hiccup one week. There was no hiccup with my team. Orlando, however, knows that they had a hiccup. Eric, sort of, mid hiccup. But Orlando's team at the end proved that it was points-wise the best team. Happens every season. Doesn't really mean anything. But in his case, he can go home and he can think about that on his walk of shame. Get the fuck out of here. I'm also going to give you guys a very interesting bit of stats. By looking at the papers, we can see the final report on the season. And what the league, what ESPN gives you is they give you the points forced average. These are the averages of all your weeks of, your scores that your fucking team put up, obviously. We've got Eric at the top of the list with 104.8. We've got Orlando at 99.2, Ed at 97.9, Andy at 94.3, sorry, Paul at 90.3, Dro at 89.6, Hensel at 89.2, Bundy, still waiting on that name, Paul, 87.0, Jason, 83.0, and Joe at 69.2. That 69.2 is a record for Joe. Once again, he's like the fucking Lance Armstrong of fucking finishing last. He owns a record of the lowest percentage points. Even in 2014, even in 2014 in his historic season, he still managed to put up more. But you'd be even more interested to know that in 2011, Joe set the record for the highest points forced average ever with 111.0. 2011 was obviously a different year because you had 8 teams. So obviously with 8 teams, that condenses the draft a lot more tighter, and you get much more valuable picks into the 5th, 6th, 7th rounds. You can still get like some real beefy players if you're only playing with 8 teams, but it doesn't take anything away from it because it's like everybody's on steroids. If everybody's on steroids and he just so happened to fare out as the best team, then it was an even playing field across the board. If you want to make a case that maybe it shouldn't be compared to other seasons, that's more of a valid point, but I still think that it's still pretty good for 111 considering the fact that Eric had 104.8 this season. Now, there are a few players that I want to mention to me that they give you something to think about moving forward for next season. I want to talk about Jimmy Graham first. Not a whole lot to say about Jimmy Graham other than he's given you something this season that he didn't provide for you the season before. I had him the season before, and it really seemed like he wasn't syncing with Russell Wilson, but now they're developing something. And, you know, occasionally he's getting touchdowns, he's getting you 13, 14-point performances, and he just wasn't doing that in 2015. So moving forward with him, I'd be real interested to see where he places in the draft next year. Adrian Peterson, of course, being probably the best running back in the game. He's always fucking injured. What risk are you willing to take that risk, off your first round draft pick? I'd really like to see what happens there. Dez Bryant, whose numbers obviously dipped, different quarterback. He's never had a star running back of this caliber. You know, DeMarco Murray did his thing, but I think Ezekiel Elliott, he's showing himself to be a lot better than DeMarco was in that season. So let's see what happens with Dez next season as well. Mike Evans, who Paul had, he ended up the 3rd ranked wide receiver in the league. If I look at him as somebody who's valuable next season, it's because I'm telling myself that to get into the playoffs, I've got to win at least 6 to 7 games. Mike Evans can probably promise me 5 to 6 very solid performances. And by very solid performances, I mean, 14 and above. I'm not expecting him to do Antonio Brown numbers and just go off for 25-point games, 4 or 5 times a season. I'm not expecting that, though. I think Mike did that just a few times this season, too. But the thing is, he's got, it's peaks and valleys with him. He's either feast or famine. And Mike Evans, who I had in the past as well, I was fucking lucky enough to pick up Mike Evans after having Vincent Jackson the year prior to that. And then Mike Evans was eating. I think Paul had him that season too. Mike Evans was fucking eating and Vincent Jackson was getting nothing. So I said, you know what? I'm going to get Mike Evans. So I drafted Mike Evans and he did shit for me last season. And then, Mike Evans just pretty much, he's done well this year. Phillip Rivers is also a quarterback. What does he have left? Does he still belong in that tier that we tend to put him, which is, I'd say, maybe in the 2nd tier? I think you would probably put Phillip Rivers. You'd group him up there with Russell. No, you've got to dip him down to the 3rd, because in the 2nd pool would probably be a Russell Wilson, would be a Matt Ryan. Those are the people that you sort of see in there. Phillip Rivers probably belongs in the 3rd group with Eli Manning. And I'd say after this season, he's dipping even lower than that. And I don't know what to expect from him during the next season. And Larry Fitzgerald, big question mark on him. And that's about it. I didn't really want to touch on the players who we know are studs because we pretty much know where they're going to place. And I'm very excited about having the 3rd pick, by the way. Very, very, very excited about that. But anyway, I'm driving away from the point. This was pretty much your year recap. That's it. I've been here with you throughout the whole season. Whichever one of you guys is still listening, thanks for listening. This fantasy season, we obviously don't play for money. We just play for bragging rights. And now Paul has the bragging rights of being the champion. Of course, for the next season, we do want to implement belts into this motherfucker. I vote for a Stanley Cup-esque belt that stays with the champion every year. Belts like a whore. It just goes from one belt to the other. And yeah, so this was your final recap of the season. And as always, may your quarterbacks get hurt before they leave the locker room. May your running backs pull their calf muscles. And may your wide receivers get arrested for marijuana possession. I fucked it up right there. I don't give a fuck. I'm leaving it. For marijuana possession. Go fuck yourselves and have a happy new year.